Welcome to the TCP IP podcast, where we put technology careers and pathways in perspective. I'm your host, Muhammed Mayet, and I'll be providing you with views from industry experts on their journeys, successes, and challenges through this ever-changing industry. In this episode, we talk to KC van Straaten to get the benefit of his more than 40 years of experience with companies like NCR, HP, and Dimension Data. Casey, thank you so much for agreeing to do this again. It's a pleasure to chat to you and to have you on one more time. From my perspective, I was fortunate enough to have worked with you at Dimension Data, learned a lot from you in the process, and I believe that getting you to share this experience with people through a channel like this podcast would be beneficial. So thank you so much for coming.
Total pleasure, May, and a heck of a nice to catch up with you again after quite a few years. I think it's about 6 or 7 years now, and I'm honored to be on your show.
Thank you. So, Casey, what we're trying to do is to give people a view of the type of experience that you've had in a career like yours. You've been in the ICD industry starting 45 years ago now. And in that time, you've held a number of different roles. So you started off as a software developer for NCR. Interestingly enough, my previous guest, Dilip, started off at NCR as well. What do you remember of your time at NCR and your first day getting started?
Well, as you know, that initial choice of where to go and where to start your career is always a big one. They say it's one of your big 3 decisions in life. It's who you marry and how many kids you have. So it is big, and it comes in an early time in life. And I must admit, I really wasn't thinking like super clearly about what I wanted to do. I'd studied essentially economics, but it was in the science faculty. So there was quite a lot of sort of science subjects that were thrown into the pot, like maths and stats and computer science. And that caught my interest, and I sort of sub-majored in business data processing. And I thought, this is new, it's exciting, and I'd be quite keen to carry on with that. So there was kind of, I studied economics, but found a different subject that I liked, and that got me cranking. And then there was a posting on the board at university talking about a software development job at NCR. And I hadn't done any research about different companies to go to or whatever. I liked the idea that it was mid-range, because I'd worked on that big IBM 370, which was, quite frankly, quite intense with their job control language and all of that stuff. So I was quite keen to go into the mid-range space. And that job invite posting was for 500 Rand a month back in the late 70s, which is crazy, man. And it's a big warning about inflation. I mean, that's 45 years ago. Anyway, so I was, that intrigued me, and I went and joined NCR, and it's just very fortunate to have fallen into, for me, it was certainly the right industry, because it's been just a wonderfully interesting place with a lot of growth. So that was really more fortunate. And when I got to NCR, what I hadn't realized is it was just a very mature company in terms of what they'd achieved in the retail space. Dilip was talking to the retail game. They were big in the NCR space there. And they'd had proper onboarding programs and just the maturity of how you get in. And I recall 4 of us software programmers, we were playing with COBOL at the time, with a 4-month dedicated teacher, lecturer, whatever, in a classroom before they let us into the company. So it's like, wow, okay, I've got a good spot here. It's a very good onboarding program. Yeah.
Coincidentally, I started off at National Data Systems at the time, which was effectively NCR. Just after all the sanctions and that, they split the company off, but it was effectively the same organization. And I think I mentioned in the previous interview as well, I learned a lot about process from there, things like ISO 9001 and how you run processes in a sustainable manner for everybody to be able to deliver their jobs effectively. I fully agree with you on that. Now, from NCR, you jumped across to HP, another large organization. You had a whole host of different roles at HP, and you moved on from other roles into a management role. That was another huge chunk of your career. Followed by that, you did a couple of CEO roles, and then you landed at Dimension Data. So between HP and Dimension Data, you had around 15 years in each of them. In a lot of modern organizations, you don't find that same type of career length. So that's something that's quite interesting. Of course, you did 15 years at Dimension Data, and then you went into semi-retirement, doing some consulting as well. Now fully retired. You started off in that software development phase, and you then had this successful career all the way up into management, executive, C-level roles. How did technology change through the different stages of your career?
Well, wow. The IT industry was on an absolute tear through the 70s and 80s, and even today. I mean, I sensed in the computing world a little slowdown in the early 2000s, but picked up again. But it's just been a wow dynamic industry to be in. And I recall back in the late 70s, this does age me, they would pull out a 400 megabyte disk drive. This thing was the size of an under-counter bar fridge, I can tell you. Another day I went and bought a memory stick for, 30 gigs or something for 180 bucks or something. That sort of growth has been absolutely phenomenal. We've seen the massive shift of hardware just getting miniaturizing. So there was a hardware movement that moved into mid-range where I entered the market. Then it went down to the PC level in the 80s, and that opened up a whole new slew of things. I mean, I just also recall the days when the PCs were around where you saw Excel for the first time, and you saw Windows, Microsoft Windows, which was different to what we had started the PC world with, where you had to sort of go up and down in a hierarchical motion. And word processing was a big thing, and email. And I remember dealing with CEOs of financial institutions when we showed them email, and the comment was, "Look, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to take shape." And I've got my own shame, because with fax, when I was in my first management role, the team said, "We've got to get a fax machine." So I'm talking early 80s, and I said, "Please, that's just complete nonsense. What are we going to do with that?" And of course, that embarrassed me, and that fax machine never stopped, it kept going. From that age of punch cards and printouts that were 30 centimeters high and you couldn't get into the mainframe shop, all the way through to graphics plotting machines. I was absolutely amazed when I saw that at HP for the first time, where you'd do a PowerPoint slide, not a PowerPoint, but a graphic system, and then would plot it out on a flatbed machine where the arms would come out, grab the little plotter pen, 4 colors, and do its thing. That miniaturization of hardware, by the time the PCs exploded, well, systems were all over the place. So some consolidation was needed, the birth of the networking era. So there was early 80s, and Dimension Data absolutely took that space in the early 80s. The miniaturization continued. The cell phone, mobile phone, now we're talking about wearables. You can go buy a ring if you want to look after your health. It's sort of a smart ring. And then Elon Musk will probably come along with his brain implants. It's just been an absolute rip and wonderful to see it. Not just that, the software world and the services world, dramatic changes where we've had massive ERP systems come to the fore, like SAP and Salesforce. We've had the internet being utilized, cloud computing, the whole growth of outsourcing, which early 2000s just got really, really big. So it's been an absolutely fabulous run through the industry. As I've reflected on these things, it's just phenomenal what took place over a couple of decades. Really phenomenal. So it definitely changed things. There was a comment when the PC software came out that because of the new advancements, people would earn more money and work shorter hours. So we were all up for that in the early 80s. But what happened was now is that fewer people have got jobs and they're working longer hours. Huge changes.
It's absolutely crazy to think how it's changed. And let me dig in a little bit deeper here, right? When you moved across to HP, you were moving from the software development side more into the customer facing side. And at that time, this is potentially in the 80s where PCs started becoming more commonplace in homes and businesses. And like you said, you're talking to CEOs about different types of technologies as they're coming out, and the guys are saying it's never going to happen. And of course, we know what has happened. How did you find yourself adapting to these types of technologies, and of course, moving from an internal development type role to a customer facing role. How did this change your conversation with the different types of people you were interacting
Yeah,
with?
because in the software development space, I'd spent a bit of time with the sales team, and I was quite keen to transfer across to sales, and I managed to do that with HP. And let me say, HP is just an iconic company where over a 15-year period, I saw a lot of my personal growth take place because of those early jobs, and you're learning a heck of a lot. So Dimension Data and HP, as you said, were my two anchor tenants in a 38-year career. And it's an interesting point, that, because you see a few CVs with a lot of movements, and then you see some with not enough movements. And what's right, it's a tricky thing. And certainly if you're in management, I feel you need to assess the situation, make some changes. And it doesn't help to leave before you see the outcome of it, because then you're not really learning. The management roles need to be a bit longer than some of the others. That's a bit of an aside, but fortunately I spent probably most of my time talking to CIOs. They were called IT managers back in the day. And we had the fortunate world where we had these multinationals and IT companies really feeding us all the information. We were abreast of it, trying to convince the end user to, buy the next thing. It was quite easy to understand what was coming down the channel. You could just see over time how the IT management role has transformed to a CIO role. They definitely have a higher profile than before. They definitely are running with bigger budgets. Back in my day, I think IT budget for a typical user environment would be 1.5% of revenue. And companies can't play in that space anymore. They've got to spend on it. The profile of the position, the budget of the position. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the online world, the sort of retail world we've seen, but we've seen online economics in many areas, it really changes the dynamics of the company, because that online system is what the user interacts with, and essentially becomes the marketing of the company, the sales of the company, the order taking of the company, and the repository of data about that client. There's definitely been some rearrangement in terms of those top structures of organizations. And we were always batting for the CIO. We always wanted them to have a bigger budget and spend with us. That's been good to see. And I heard a last comment on this, I heard a comment recently that by 2050, all organizations, when you say something like that, it's maybe an exaggeration, will essentially be technology companies. And 2050 is still some way out. I mean, it's still some way out given the way this industry is working. And I thought about that a little bit, and you got to think, well, yeah, maybe before then.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've actually got on my notes, one of the things that I noted is you were one of the first people that told me when I was at Dimension Data at the time, and I think it was the Mercury or Rosa outsource that we were working on, and you said you can't look at banks and financial services organizations as banks and financial services organizations. They are effectively IT organizations. And I remember that comment, and that's pretty much stayed with me since then. That lines up exactly with what you're saying. Both of us are, I think, old enough that we'll remember things like bank books, where you go in and have your balance written down and that kind of stuff, which just doesn't happen anymore. The bank or financial services organization can't operate without IT.
Exactly so. Exactly.
Yeah. So that covers a lot of the time that you spent at HP, and specifically talking about some of the service space and some of the PC space. And like you mentioned, moving across into a couple of CEO roles in between, but then when you moved across to Dimension Data, that must have been an interesting time, because that was in 2000. And we all know what was happening around that time as well. And of course, at the same time, you had, while it started a little bit earlier, a huge boom in internet services at that point as well, which of course had the requirement from a network perspective. And Dimension Data being aligned with Cisco heavily and the leader in pretty much that market across the continent, that of course must have had some interesting positions.
Yeah, I really feel blessed to have spent 15 years at HP and I think 15 or 16 at Data, because both of them very iconic companies and actually quite different in many respects. The one's a multinational, 100,000 employees, and the other one was sort of SA based but moving internationally very, very fast. And when I got into the position of services there, that was really a challenge just because of the scope of what we're dealing with there and also the multitude of technologies that we were supporting. So enjoyable role. I mean, I do recall my phone being on at 2 a.m. in the morning and ringing quite often, but outside of that, it was really challenging.
You moved from the services role into a number of different other ones, and that general manager for the special projects team, which was where we worked together. That was a really unique team. Right? You had a bid management team, you had some bid coordinators, you had a financial manager, and you had chief solutions architects working across all of these different technology spaces. What's your opinion on that type of approach to strategic projects versus how people pretty much handle it ad hoc in a lot of
Yeah, a very interesting time there for sure. And as you just noted, it brought together a lot of disciplines. And we just had a small team, maybe 12 people, but top members of those teams. And one of the things in the IT world is there's always this responsibility of where the systems integration takes place, because you've got a great hardware technology, great software, you've got great networking, you've got this and that. But putting that together just creates a whole lot of issues, different versions and et cetera, et cetera. And what that team was able to do, just in terms of collating sort of pan-African cross-company sort of PCI SDD activity, I think really assisted the organization and put together some really compelling, client meaningful bids and big bids. I mean, you'll recall Data was doing so well back in that time that we're just talking billions of rands, where those contracts are being signed. And one needed to have the comfort that the team had gelled it together sufficiently that it didn't fall off the bus when it got to the client side. Very exciting times, I must say.
Casey, in terms of how you see the changes in your different roles, can you talk a little bit about moving from your individual contributor role into a management type role? How did you find that, and what are some of the experiences you can convey to people that might be listening?
My first management role came at HP. I'd moved down to the Cape as a salesperson, and I got into the position of being the Cape or Western Cape broad-term branch manager for HP. It was, as I recall, an office of about 25, 30 people, but the role itself was predominantly around the sales team of maybe 4 or 5 people or so. So that was quite small, but there was this responsibility, if you want, to be the office spokesman and just keep an eye on things for all of the other disciplines that operate. I was dead scared, man. It was like a first guy into this world, and how do we deal with this? And I made some mistakes, got through that. In fact, as I joined, the results were immediately not good. They made my life a little tougher. I remember I was putting a whole lot of telephones up, like a telemarketing center, just to call companies in Cape Town and say, look, we want to talk to you. Who's the IT manager? Where you guys at? And the whole team helped with that. So that was obviously a big step forward, and I think people do need to be onboarded into management a little bit more carefully in general. And as you go through different management roles, you have different flavors to it. And the next step of management is obviously when you're managing managers of people. It just takes a different view on the situation and how you deal with that. And of course, the higher you get, the less influence you have on the ground directly. All of those roles I really enjoyed because I like the idea of having some measure of decision making, using judgment, making some decisions that could be applied. And I found there was a great pleasure in it. But for me, the most important thing is hire the right people. That's absolutely step one, because it's so much about people. We know this and we talk about it. Man, you just got to have the right squad. And if you do that, your management role is I won't say diminished, but it's easier for sure.
So Casey, actually, that makes a really good segue to one of the other topics for discussion is you're talking about hiring the right person, right? What sort of advice would you give to someone who is now starting out into the industry? If you were hiring today, what would you be looking for, and what sort of recommendations or suggestions would you give to new candidates who are looking for advice?
Well, first of all, very often you're caught in a trap where you need to hire pretty quickly. So, first of all, don't do that, because if you make the wrong mistake, the wrong hire, you're in for the long run. I recall situations where I didn't have people on board, and it was sweaty situations, just waiting to get the right people on board. People are hired for certain things that are relatively well known and basic. You got to have the smarts. So you got to check out the person's capability in the space that you want to hire them for. A big factor is conscientiousness and diligence. It's a precursor to success, quite frankly. So you want to be looking for that conscientious approach from the people you're dealing with. Integrity, I think, is absolutely key. And there's an element of resilience or grit. It's not always easy to pick up in an interview, but I have seen over the years employees that have had that, or colleagues, I should say, that have had that element of grit when things aren't good, and how they push through, that conscientiousness coming through, and it's great. One can go on, but critical thinking, I think, is absolutely key. Do you just accept something that's given to you or told to you, or do you run it through your own version of, well, what are the assumptions? Where is this coming from? Are there any other possible realities? Where's the evidence? And that decision making, absolutely important. You need to have good communication skills in an organization and good collaboration skills. We've been in meetings where the meetings aren't going anywhere. You just aren't. They've got their own agenda. They're just not focused on what the ultimate objective is. And it's a mess, quite frankly. So that collaboration capability is absolutely key. You want people with creativity. You want them to be looking to change things up, like we can improve the situation. This is how we should do it. So, there's a lot to look for, and you've got to be careful that you're not just looking for someone you like or the same as you, or etc. etc. Yeah.
Let me do a quick follow up here. One of the things that I noticed is you didn't mention anything around academics, and I find that quite interesting because, particularly, so I'm in Dubai at the moment, and one of the things that I find in this region is that there's a heavy emphasis on academics. In some cases, you'll find someone who has 2 degrees or masters, and, even in that case, they're lacking some of the other qualities that you mentioned. I think while academics can help you identify potential candidates, I'm not sure if they're as relevant as they would have been previously. What's your thoughts on that?
When I started out 45 years ago, academics was a big thing. You just needed to have something behind your name. Otherwise, you're not taking life seriously. Over time, that really has slipped away, even to a point where people had an academic background that was poo-pooed, like an MBA, like, oh, really, did you do that sort of thing? I think you've got to rate it for the sense that somebody's heading out, they're conscientious, taking life seriously, and they want to learn and increase their sort of values. So that's a good thing. You do learn stuff. There's no doubt you pick up, if not problem-solving skills, you do learn about business. But it absolutely doesn't need to be the number one item. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, that gives a good for someone coming in, the type of things that a hiring manager would look for, the type of things they need to try and get across in an interview. But what about somebody who's mid-career, someone who is already in a role, maybe they're enjoying it, maybe they're not, but from here they want to find their next step. What would you suggest for somebody in that type of scenario? Maybe they're in a senior individual contributor role and looking to move into management, or maybe they're already in a middle management type role and wanting to move high in an organization.
Yeah. Look, as you know, career shouldn't be based on, well, I'll give thought to the upfront situation, and then I'll wait sort of 20 years and then have a sort of mid-level career view. But in some respects, it happens like that because there's a saying, so not fact, that around about 45 is your reality check about yourself and the work zone out there. Because you got to a point now, certainly if you're into management play, that management triangle is starting to thin out, and you start becoming aware of your limitations or your lack of future opportunities. That second phase of life is, I think it's very important in the sense that you've got to embrace it. It's a second go, embrace it, and really evaluate your frame of reference that you have about who you are, how you're doing, where you want to be. You've got to kind of reassess all of that and focus on what it is you want to do. And you absolutely need to invest in yourself. Too often you think, I know everything I need to know that going forward. You've got to constantly be thinking of what that investment is going to be to jump you forward. You can go back to all of the same questions you asked up front when you're starting out, like what are your priorities in life? We know it's going to be around health is the absolutely key thing. If you don't bring that to the party, you're not going to do well at anything. Your family and friends, that networking zone is important, and financial, obviously, very important. I get a little scared when I see a lot of people, yuppies, driving around in fancy cars because, honestly, that's just throwing money away. Be careful about that. Finances are extremely important to keep in check as you go forward. You can also evaluate big things like what geography do you want to play in which country, actually, and by then you should be knowing these things a little more so you can make the call. What size company do you want to work for? Do you want to work for multinational? Do you want to work for locally based company? What function, what role? Often one doesn't look at all of those boxes again to say what's happening for me. So that's key. But the most important thing is you have to identify your strengths. You got to know what your strengths are, because the strengths are the things that make you happy, and you get the passion built into it, and you get some forward momentum. And strengths are often very difficult to determine because people who have a strength, a natural strength in a particular line, aren't aware of it because it comes so easy to them. They're not thinking that it's a strength. Probably think I'm not good enough at this. I need to do more of it. And it's that evaluation that you can get from a coach, you can get from 360 evaluation with your colleagues, just being open with your colleagues saying, what do you think I'm good at or not? Because I've certainly seen careers, and more than one, where people have struggled for a decade in just the wrong role, and they get perceived differently and they perceive themselves differently. And then they make a change, and boom, the whole thing changes.
That makes a lot of sense. Some of the things that you're talking about, I see in myself as well. A simple example, I know that the moment I started moving into management, I didn't necessarily focus on some of the training elements and then keeping up to date on that. That's something that I'll definitely take away from this discussion. One of the other areas you mentioned, which was interesting, was specifically around the type of company that you're looking for. So moving to a multinational or changing geography as well. With the current climate in South Africa, there's obviously a lot of people that are moving out of South Africa. But what's your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you see South Africa changing because of this?
Yeah.
How do you see the availability of skills in South Africa as well?
That's a heck of a question. And my oldest son has moved to New Zealand. My youngster is still in South Africa. And it really, really is a big question, because there's no doubt there's some headwinds in the country in terms of going forward. It's not to say there's nothing that can be had, that you can't make breakthroughs, you can't do well, but it's not as easy as it was certainly in my day. Definitely not as easy. Your lifestyle is a big factor that you got to consider. And I must say, South Africa is just blessed with the kind of people it has, the weather it has, the facilities we have, the culture we have in many respects. So there's some really good stuff here. It's very difficult to go and find that elsewhere. So you make that move, it's going to be a tough couple of years. You'll get through it. I mean, you're a citizen of the world, effectively. But it's not straightforward. Look at my younger son, he's thinking about this. it's not an easy call to make. And I certainly wouldn't judge anybody either way in terms of how they're going forward. I will say that if you're in South Africa, it's a good idea to be getting work experience that will stand you in good stead internationally, maybe getting a qualification that would allow you to get higher points when you look to move overseas, if that's what you want to do. And certainly keep some money in dollars. You've got to have a bit of mitigation taking place. You and I have been in this IT game in South Africa. I know you're not here now, but I was just reflecting on how dynamic the IT landscape has been. And then that's sitting on top of a political landscape and a social landscape that is just changed dramatically in the last sort of 3 decades. And honestly, you kind of take it for granted. But at the end of the day, being in this industry, in this country, I mean, you are just like streets ahead, I think, of most other places in the world and most other industries in terms of learning to be smart and to adapt and be resilient. And that could be a strength you have, but you don't know it because you're just going along.
Yeah. That's a good point, and I think I can add in here as well. Having worked in Dubai for the past almost 9 years now, and having worked in other countries around the region, interacted with different types of organizations and different verticals. South Africa, as much as it has challenges, and is a third world country, if you still want to call it that, the industries are very mature. Some of the types of processes, the way that some of our sectors work, whether it's banking and financial services or in healthcare, they're way ahead of what you see in some of the other countries. So you're absolutely correct in that getting some of that experience and being able to take it internationally can stand you in good stead.
No, that's a very good point. If you look at a Johannesburg setup, for example, it's when you grow up there and you run around the streets, you think, oh, well, it's, tip of Africa, what are we talking about? But as a metropolitan hub, it really is the biggest you're going to find in sort of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And as you say, some of the things that are happening there are just absolutely world class. So you are learning, you are getting that experience.
KC, let's talk a little bit more about some of the technology aspects. You gave the example of you can today get a ring to monitor your healthcare. But what I'm particularly interested in understanding is your view on some of the more recent developments. So we're talking AI, blockchain, metaverse, etc. Have you got any thoughts on any of these specific areas and how you see them impacting the landscape for companies, but then also for people who are working in the industry?
Probably nothing intelligent to say, but I'm really interested in this space, And first of all, I don't want to talk about blockchain. I recall, excuse me, being introduced to Bitcoin, sitting next to a guy at a breakfast table. He said, "Casey, have you heard about this Bitcoin thing?" I said, "No." He said, "It's a digital currency." So I said, "Wow, man, I like digital stuff. So tell me more." And I went to research the day weekend. I was very keen to get involved with a little gamble. And then I saw you had to find somebody who would mine it for you. And I was like, wow, that's, you don't just go over account and buy the thing. So I gave up on that. But the reason I don't want to talk about it is it was priced at 12 US cents at the time. So about 2012, I think. And unfortunately, I've done the maths. Put 10,000 rand into that and take a few billion out a decade later. So I think it's at $47,000 at the moment. Technology for me is just super interesting, and it goes to the point of humanity. To what extent is technology going to really, really make things better for people on Earth? Musk talks a lot about that. He talks a lot about I want to find solutions for big issues for people. He's got so many companies on the go. So I'm not too happy that he's involved with X because I'm not sure, it's taking his time away from solving some big issues. Not that social media isn't a big issue, by the way.
Yeah. Social media is a whole other discussion. We could probably have an hour just talking about that.
Sorry, a bit of an aside, but social media has got such an element, such a capability to bring things up to speed, make people aware of change, cultural change, what's right, what we could be doing. Because I've heard, so I don't know if it's science or not, but typically it takes about 150 years historically mankind to swing over new cultural ideas, change, develop, fairly broadly. So social media comes along and you think, wow, this is going to be in a snap. You just get the right information out there, boom, everybody gets on board, they see what's happening, and humanity will progress. I'm not on social media a lot, but what I see there, once you hide somebody's ID, it's so divisive. It's like ripping it apart. That's just completely messy. But back to technology. So it's not slowing. We talked about the last 40 years. Wow, it's really hitting. And AI is, for me, I read about, it's potentially the biggest disruptor we've seen from a technology point of view. And we've seen a lot. So that's saying things.
I'm not sure if you've played around with it, right? But I mean, if you take ChatGPT as an example, it's not AI in the definition of AI. Yeah, it's a specific use case, which is, yeah, if you simplify it, it's really just text prediction on steroids, right? When you look at that and you think about what it's able to do just at that level, and then you think about, okay, what happens when we've got artificial general intelligence, then yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I have played with it. The most fun is on the image generators, and that produces stuff. There's some really good artists in play and who've done some creative original work. I took a look at that, and 4 minutes later, I produced very similar stuff, and they were completely thrown by that. You can obviously do your poems. Some of the poems you get out are phenomenal, and write speeches. Just 2 days ago, I sat here with the head of a golf group, and we were trying to get a speech going for his end of year function. Well, it just wasn't heading in the right direction, and it took us about 2 hours of input to get a 20-minute speech eventually. So that didn't come out. And then I've used the chat function a bit as well, just to play around with it. But there's no doubt this thing is going to just go at top speed. And the interesting thing is, just musing on the side there, is that if AI is looking at the whole internet and taking that body of work and absorbing it, and then in a pre-trained manner spewing it out, you think, well, where's the new intelligence going to come from? Unless you then think, well, then maybe AI using itself will then create its own next level of new findings. That could happen. They've discovered another, I don't know how many minerals now using AI. But yeah, it's fascinating. I'm certainly going to keep an eye on it. And I think it's going to be great for small businesses when you see what those people can now leverage. I think it's going to be good for that. It's going to be good for democratizing information, how we get it into the hands in South Africa of everybody who needs it and get them schooled in it. But it's an opportunity that one wouldn't have before. But I look at that AI sort of grabbing the white-collar worker space, and then you look at robotics and additive printing grabbing the blue-collar space. Sorry, I don't like the white-collar, blue-collar thing, so scrap that. But it really is going to shake up the workspace. And look, clearly there will be opportunities of note, as we go forward. But yeah, it's going to fire it up pretty good.
Coming back to something that you said a little bit earlier, right, is when all of this technology was coming into play at the early part of your career, there was this discussion about how it's going to reduce the amount of work hours people need to put in and make things more efficient. And to a large degree, they're saying the same thing about AI. But here we are today, still doing the 5-day work week with some flexibility, granted, and a better quality of life than would have been had previously. But yeah, I don't see. I think, and please give me your opinion, which is why I'm phrasing it this way, right? Is I don't think that the change in technology is going to necessarily reduce the amount of human input needed. It will change the type of input and the type of productivity, but I don't think it's going to take away the amount of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, okay, that's quite a tough one. This whole thing of productivity is about input to output, and clearly AI can spin out some output pretty rapidly. I do agree with you. You've got to be quite precise, as I learned the other day, and with the input that you're putting in there. The whole question is to what level artificial general intelligence is really going to kick in down the line, because they are looking at these kind of things. I hope it's not a situation where fewer people will be working harder because of AI and robotics and whatever else. One can be positive. It's not all going to disappear. It's just going to change. So it's back to the same thing. You've got to be smart. You've got to be adaptable. You've got to be resilient and follow their motion.
Any thoughts on what sort of careers people should be looking at? Now, if somebody is looking for something to pivot to or study on and potentially look as a career change, what would you think would be some of the areas that would be coming up?
The first thing, you've got to be doing something that you want to enjoy. So I made that point, or not enjoy, but it's a strength of yours. But you can apply your strength in a multitude of careers and industries. But I personally, and because I had a good run with a growth industry, is to look for the growth opportunities. Certainly the space around AI, biotech, these are all things that are environmental activity. They're all things that are promising good growth down the line. And there are a lot of IT spaces like AI, I've mentioned before, like cloud computing is big and just seems to be getting bigger and bigger, that allow you the opportunity to get in, learn quickly, and then have some room to grow and to express yourself. Having said that, I've often surprised at some basic industries. So think tiles and tires, for example, and you see what gross margins these companies are playing around with. You're like, that's crazy, man.
Yeah, so going back to trades, yeah.
And our gross margins are like that. Bottom line, you just got to keep thinking of it. What's been interesting for me, just reflecting on this, is you talk about a career, and it is a ripple effect as you go, as you pick up things, learn things, and move forward or whatever. But when you look back at it, you actually look back at it in chunks. Like, it was that job with NCR, then it was HP, then it was... Because when you're in a company, it has a huge effect on you. It's the people you meet, it's what you learn, it's your opportunities you have. So your question around which industry or which new thing to go with is important. I think choosing the right company is super important as well, to the extent that you can choose them and they choose you.
Thank you so much for that, Casey. At the moment, you're retired, but you're still open to executive coaching. What type of coaching do you currently do? Have you got any thoughts on any sorts of other areas you want to get involved in now that you've got more free time available?
What free time? Yeah, that's a good thing. Look, the days are full out, it's pretty good. And as I say to my mates, I don't live a meaningful life and I don't live an engaged life, but it's very pleasant. So I'll take that. No, it's keeping healthy. It's so key. I've been learning that more and more, and I'm fortunately in good health, but you have to just stay ahead of that. Very important. Otherwise, you're not any use to yourself even, and your friends and family. That's key. There's time for reading, for charity work, for sport. There's a lot of stuff. I'm battling at the moment because I've got in the house here, I've got Siri listening to me. I introduced Alexa recently. I've got Sonos talking to me and my LG TV. So a bit of a conversation going on here. And I need to get AI to sort it out and get it done. I really like reading, but I kind of make it not the priority. So I'm working on that aspect. Really good network of friends. There's some great people in Pledge that have achieved fantastic things. And they're just down to earth people. And nobody wants to talk about a career. So having this discussion is like a bit, we've got to think back here and see where we're coming from. But yeah, I would like to coach again. I just really, that's something I super enjoy. But I haven't gone to market again to pick up on it. But it is something I think I would like to get into. And I'm waiting for a digital assistant to come along that will work for me in the home. So it'll say, Casey, it must come to me and say, look, I reckon these are the friends you should invite for a dinner party. And this is the menu we recommend that you have. These will be the ingredients once you pick the menu. Send out the invites automatically. When people arrive, I must do the table seating. I must know social media wise who's spoken to who last, and maybe who doesn't like to get the seating done. Getting too comfortable, yeah.
So I would not be surprised if somebody's already working on something like that. But what I would say as well is we should maybe be a little bit skeptical and a little bit careful of what we wish for, because it does mean that, of course, yeah, if I or digital is too involved in everything that we do, it takes away certain elements of humanity from our interactions, if I can put it that way. But that's just my personal opinion. Right? The reality is that yeah, a lot of the digital services do make things convenient.
No, you're right. And I know I'm on my phone too much. I justify it by saying I read a lot of news items, political, economics, whatever. But do I need that? How's it going to change my life? Pretty much. One needs to get out there. And I really fear for the youngsters today that are just locked into TikTok and often just watching absolute rubbish. When there is some good stuff there to be had. And I don't know where that goes, actually. That's a big parenting responsibility.
So I can tell you with my kids, it's been a challenge. We do have a fully stocked bookshelf, and I won't say aggressively, but adamantly enforced the no social media rule for the kids. So that's worked out quite well. Of course, as they get older now, they're starting to access it, but they're able to do it in a more restrained manner. So you don't have the type of doom scrolling that you see a lot of people doing in public at the moment. But you're right. I mean, yeah, it's something that even us older folk need to be aware of and be conscious of how much screen time we're sharing.
Yeah. Well, Matt, that's fantastic. So I appreciate this, and it has given me reason to reflect back on the career. I'll put that away now and just look to the future. But that's
No,
your
100%. Thank you, Casey. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, thank you so much for making the time for it and putting up with some of the tech hassles as we got started. Any other topics you want to touch on or anything you'd like to say?
The thing about a career, also something that I just have been thinking about now, is how do you measure that? So somebody's setting out to hit a career, how do you measure that? And one of the first things, certainly back 45 years ago, it's all about your position, number of reports, your earnings. That's the measure of a career. But when you reflect back on it, and those were good experiences, but when you reflect back on it, it's more about, so where did you really make a contribution? Did you have some personal growth through that, like proper growth through your career? And did you optimize your capability? And it does put a different perspective on it.
I think you're correct. Right, success is not necessarily defined on those elements, but rather, did you enjoy yourself? Did you achieve something for yourself and your family while still maintaining your health and your life balance? And those are the important.
Yeah, exactly so. Exactly so. Yeah.
Casey, again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And hopefully we can chat again in future on an episode like this, maybe about a different type of topic. Always happy to have you on. And
no, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And good luck with your podcast roles into the future. So I'll be tapping in to see how that goes.
Thank you, Casey.
Cheers.
Another amazing guest I've had the good fortune of working with. It was good to see Casey still so keen on technology, and we can all hope to maintain that sense of wonder to the amazing advances we still see on a regular basis. We hope that there's been some inspiration for you to take from this podcast and apply to your own career path. A short disclaimer, all opinions expressed in this podcast are our own and do not reflect the opinions of our employers. In case you've missed it, please feel free to have a listen to the previous episode, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one too.